I'd always wanted to make a tremolo, but I have always found that effect just by itself was kind of boring.
I can kind of hear you. Yeah.
It modulates volume. There's another effect that I find useful but not necessarily exciting is compressors.
Yeah.
I know there are companies like Keeley is famous off a compressor. And, like, that's great for him. When people talk about compressors, I just don't care. The Prometheus and Tremcoder didn't start out to be those pedals. It just started out as I wanted to have microcontroller code where it's easy to integrate LFOs, tap tempo, savable presets, maybe MIDI, leave all those options open. Whenever I start a new project, I always want to learn something that I haven't done before.
Yeah.
Not try to learn 5 new things, just one. Yeah. So that I can integrate that into my skills and repertoire, whatever you want to call it, and get to some semblance of competence before I try to learn something else.
So the first question I have for you is just when did Subdecay get started? What was sort of the inspiration for you to start building your own pedals? Is this a team of you? How did it develop? When did you get started? So it's really just a general, when did Subdecay get started?
So there are a few different things that led to it. I'd always been interested in electronics when I was a kid. My dad always bought those Radio Shack kits that we would build, or the 201 projects. I think the first thing I built was a crystal radio.
Nice.
So it's been, I don't know, like I was about 10 years old in the 80s. And it was just really fascinating to me as a kid that I built something. It only had like 15 parts and it worked.
Yeah.
And that was really interesting. Fast forward to adulthood. I went to community college for a while and I took a computer programming course, but really actually wasn't that helpful. At least I didn't think it was at the time, but it actually about 20 years later was really helpful that I had some of the core understanding of how programming works. And I'd actually also programmed, if you were a kid in the 80s and you had a Commodore or Apple II or something, you wrote some programs for that too. But really in the early stages of Subdecay, there was no coding. It was all analog stuff. I actually got started repairing ATA MP1s. You know what that is?
No.
Okay. ATA is an old, they made the flanger. Mm-hmm. Everybody knows the flanger, right?
Oh, yeah.
They also made rack gear back in the 80s. And the MP1 was a preamp, and it had a clean channel and a distortion channel. It had a couple tubes in it. But by the early 2000s or even the late 90s, these things were getting to be old. A lot of them needed repairs. And I bought one on eBay just on a whim. I want to say around 99. And it was super cheap, like nobody wanted them. And I got it, and parts of it didn't work. I think the unit has a chorus, has a compressor on the clean channel, has a rudimentary EQ for the distortion. It's not necessarily great sounding, but it was really noisy, especially the clean channel. I think the distortion channel actually worked fine. And I started poking through it, and I found out that there was this online community dedicated to fixing just that one.
Okay.
That one unit. And I learned a lot from that. And after I fixed mine, somebody had a similar problem, sent his to me. I repaired it, had exactly the same problem. It was a bad capacitor that had dried up, and usually that's because something sits unused for a really long time.
Yeah.
Or because of heat. It can also be because of heat, which is possible because those rack units have tubes in them, so they do run a little bit hot. Anyway, from there, I posted something. I don't even remember where I posted it. I posted something about fixing it and what the problem was, and if anybody's having this problem. And over the next couple years, I ended up probably repairing about 15 of them for other people.
Yeah.
And at first I just did it for free because I was interested in it, and eventually I think I was charging like about $50.
Mm-hmm.
And even before that, I had some stuff around where I had electronic parts around. I actually worked in the electrical industry, but that's really not the same thing. When I kind of got serious, I'd actually made the first Subdecay pedal when my band was still together, but it wasn't a company yet. It was called the Stupid Box. I called it that because it was really simple, and I kind of knew what I was doing, but I built stuff from either kits or schematics before where I didn't necessarily 100% understand how it worked. And that pedal was never meant to be a production pedal. At this time, I actually was thinking about making pedals for a living or trying to find a job with a pedal builder. At the time, I was up in Seattle. I think there are a few companies up there, but the market back then was mostly Boss.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
One of the guys that I met actually wasn't in Seattle. His name was Brad Fee, and he started a company called Tone Factor. They were in business for a few years. They sold mostly pedals. They also sold guitars. Before he started that company, he was arranging tour boxes, which I think they still do those on the Gear page, where they'll get a bunch of people to send pedals in. They'll put it in one box and send it around to 10 or 12 or 20 people. And eventually the pedals are all supposed to go back where they came from.
Yeah.
And I ended up sending my stupid box, the first Subdecay pedal, to Brad for that. Whatever, because a lot of the stuff that would end up in the boxes that he sent out were just DIY stuff that people had done, and sometimes there would be other production quality stuff. The first pedal I made, it was like spray painted yellow. Yeah. And it was labeled with a Sharpie.
Amazing.
But a few people actually really liked it. And like I said, I'd been thinking I wanted to get into pedal building, but I didn't think that would be pedal. I didn't even think it was ready. Yeah, going back to microcontrollers, that it opens up a lot of possibilities. Another chip that I use a lot of is the LM13700, which is closely related to the CA3080 from the 70s and 80s. It was used in a lot of synths and a lot of effects. Like this synthesizer has the original, this is a reissue. The original one used CA3080s. I believe this uses LM13700s. It's called an operational transconductance amplifier.
Ah.
Similar to a voltage controlled amplifier, which sound comes out of your mouth a little bit more easily.
Yeah.
Really common in the synthesizer world. But pairing that with digital is a lot easier than trying to control an overdrive. I mean, you can do it. You can use digital pots, but with the OTA chips, or even using a VCA, you can control things digitally with just a voltage, and it makes it really easy to integrate a lot of different things together. Easy might not be the right word. But that opened up a lot of possibilities as far as design goes. How I usually start is I'll start out with an effect. Like I'll take the Tremcoder, for example.
Yeah.
The core circuit of the Tremcoder, the actual tremolo part of it, none of the digital, is something that I designed probably, I want to say around 2015, maybe earlier. I'd always wanted to make a tremolo, but I have always found that effect just by itself was kind of boring.
I can kind of hear you. Yeah.
It modulates volume. There's another effect that I find useful but not necessarily exciting is compressors.
Yeah.
I know there are companies like Healy is famous off a compressor. Like that's great for him. When people talk about compressors, I just don't care.
No, I think we have the same kind of brain. I hear you totally. It's like, okay, it's attack and release.
I understand that so if you do any recording, compressors are super useful. That's kind of like your design philosophy in a way. It feels like, 'cause it's like, there's a lot of ways to build a traditional effect, like a tremolo or a compressor. But what I've been finding from your catalog, and I'm obviously the whole COVID thing and electronic purchasing has affected the business in a lot of strong ways. But I look at the catalog now, and I know 2024 very different from 2019, 2020. There's just a lot of creative effects on the website, and like a flanger or a phaser that has some unique. It's obviously digitally controlled modulation and things like that. And it's cool to hear that maybe the heart of it is this analog circuit, but it's being digitally manipulated by these chips. And so I think of like Oh Blood Noise and their dual moving filter is something that comes to mind. And that thing's really exciting because I forget what chip they use, but same kind of deal where it's a digitally controlled analog circuit. And so I don't know. I guess it's cool that that seems to be, you take something that's maybe traditionally boring and you kind of expand on it, which is really, really cool. Like I said, I designed that circuit originally back in, I want to say 2015. It worked. It sounded fine. And, I had it on a breadboard. At some point, I built a prototype. I'm like, well, it works, but I wasn't really feeling it. Like I remember sitting down and thinking about writing some ad type for it for the website.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Because it was just a tremolo. Like it did what every other tremolo could do.
Yeah. Did it at this point have the multiple waveforms, or was it just like a stock tremolo?
It was just a regular sine wave or sine-ish wave. LFO. modulating volume.
Yeah.
I think it had a volume knob, which was something some tremolos don't have.
Yeah.
Which can be kind of annoying, honestly, because most tremolo pedals that I've owned have a bit of a volume drop.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on how it seems like the more you turn up the depth, even though when it's at its loudest point, it might be slightly louder than the clean signal.
Yeah.
The actual effect of it, like in a mix, as soon as you turn it on, it kind of drops back a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So the volume knob thing was the one thing that I thought that would be a reason to sell it. But it's not like there aren't other tremolos out there with a volume knob. And so it just it went on the back burner for a while. Started working on other things. It was around that same time where I was getting more curious on the digital stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it took a while to really figure out what I was doing. I hadn't done programming in 20 years.
Yeah.
The original programming I'd done was in BASIC and in C.
Okay.
Most microcontrollers, the easiest way to get into it is in C++, which is quite a bit different than C. I mean, it looks the same. There are a lot more features. There's also the fact that I hadn't done it in so long that I really didn't remember.
Yeah, you gotta brush up on it. Yeah.
How things worked. The other thing is, when you are programming on a computer, is very different than programming a chip.
Mm-hmm.
When you're programming on a computer, it's really easy to get an output that you can see on a screen.
Yeah.
You can say, print hello, and it'll say hello.
Yeah. Yeah, it's 1-to-1.
With a microcontroller, to get it to print anything, you have to connect it through a serial connection to a computer. That's the easiest way to do it, to get information back so that things are working.
Yeah.
Like what the most common beginning projects for microcontrollers is just to get an LED to blink so that you can see you have some feedback that your code actually uploaded and worked.
Yeah.
I actually have some visual aids here.
Yeah.
These are two things that I do my programming on. This is a ST Electronics microcontroller development board.
Mm-hmm.
Has a little USB connection where you can plug it into your computer and upload code.
That's handy.
And it also has a serial connection where you can get back, basic text information to know that it is working and it's putting the data that you input into the right place. This is a Nuvoton board. Started using Nuvoton so I'll restart on that thought. I used ST microcontrollers for a really long time. In 2020, it became really hard to get those. We found this company, Nuvoton, which I believe is a Chinese company, but I could actually get some of them. There are some huge differences between the way the Tremcoder and the Prometheus work. But the way that the LFOs are coded and how all the different information is routed around in the code is done the same way. The presets are done the same way. They save the presets to the same EEPROM in the same location, almost to the point where you could pull the EEPROM out of a Tremcoder, put it in the Prometheus, and it would work. We'd have a bunch of really weird settings.
Yeah.
That wouldn't make sense, but but it would work. I don't think you could do it the other way around because the presets on the Tremcoder, every preset, even if the preset isn't using a sequence, it still has that space saved for a sequence. And if that data isn't written, the Tremcoder will get very mad and it will want you to do a factory reset. Or actually, I think you can get away with saving another preset over it, but if you load that preset, it either won't load or it will lock up. I take that back. I think in the Tremcoder, I did a lot of things to make sure that it wouldn't lock up. That was one of the problems we had with the Prometheus. When the early version, because it would, when you plug it in the first time, when it is after the code's been sent to the microcontroller, you power up the pedal and it writes all of the user presets to the EEPROM from the microcontroller.
Yeah.
And sets up all the global settings and does a few other things. And then at the end, it's supposed to write another message to the microcontroller that said it was finished. Mm-hmm. Early on with the first Prometheuses, they actually wrote that first part because I just figured somebody would plug it in, or I would plug it in because we do it before it leaves.
Yeah.
And it would work. And it would write all that stuff. It only takes a couple seconds. One of the things that I didn't realize, I have my setup in here, where when I send code to the microcontroller, it just gets to the point where the code is on the microcontroller. It doesn't do anything else. It doesn't restart the microcontroller to try to run the code. But where I actually build the pedals is a different place. And it tries to run the code while it's connected to the programmer. Mm-hmm. First thing you want to do once it's done programming is disconnect it. So it would get halfway done. We sent out a couple pedals where the last couple presets wouldn't get written, and they you get to the last couple presets, and it would just lock up. The microcontroller we used in the Prometheus 3 is the same as the microcontroller in the Tremcoder 2. Mm. It only has 64 kilobytes of storage.
Okay.
It was one of the first microcontrollers to really come back on the market. And it wasn't a big deal for the Tremcoder because it doesn't have a lot of information that it needs to store. But with the Prometheus 3, one of the things that I really wanted to do, because it is a fairly complicated pedal with lots of parameters, I wanted to have more than just the 11 presets that you'd have on the Tremcoder or even our Pixelwave. So there are a bunch of non-savable presets, and it's 11 by 11. So what is that? 132?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there's 132 presets to use as starting points because that pedal really is kind of like a synthesizer. You can change one setting on it and it would like not make any sound, or it will just like oscillate and go crazy.
Yeah.
And so I really wanted to have starting points where you could turn it on, find what you like, tweak it, and save it instead of trying to edit 40 parameters to try to find something.
I see. That makes total sense.
Create something that you want. So that originally, when the pedal was almost done and I added those presets, I think it was about 5 kilobytes over the amount of storage. And it sounds like you're programming like an Atari or something.
Yeah, right.
Kilobytes.
Kilobytes.
That's the kind of memory that you're working with.
But no, this is really cool. I didn't realize how well it's kind of a game like with the microcontrollers of how to optimize like the storage, and the fact that the Tremcoder and Prometheus are kind of shared and function, and you gave yourself the ability to make manipulations. I guess you consolidate things, which is nice. So the code is similar, and it provides you the opportunity to consider a new effect. I think maybe like because you have a filter, you have a tremolo, and I know you already have a flanger out, and it gives you that possibility to put the same framework as those two into a new effect, which is really cool and without much of a hassle, because you kind of did the grunt work beforehand. And I guess one question I have for you is is it the QSAR and Starlight? Am I saying QSAR right? Is that what it is?
Starlight?
There's Starlight, and then there's the QSAR or Quasar?
Oh, Quasar.
Quasar. I was like, I don't know how to pronounce this one. But are those similar in the same like archetype of coding, or are they using different chips?
So those two are actually very different. I did not write the code for what's used on the Starlight. That code has actually been around. I want to say it was originally written in 2011, and it was written by one of the first guys that I hired. He had a little bit of a background in programming, but just like me, he had more of a background in programming, but he had never done microcontrollers or trying to program chips.
Yeah.
It took a while for that to actually get working. I want to say he worked on that for, I don't know, probably year or so before it was actually working. That wasn't the only thing he was doing.
Yeah.
It was, and actually I take that back, because there was a pedal that came out before that. It was the first Quasar DLX. He wrote the code for that as well. And I was not involved in writing it at all. I just gave him a list. He told me what he thought he could do, what he thought would be easy, what he thought would be really hard, and I gave him room to be creative as well. Some of the LFOs in the original Quasar DLX, he came up with on his own.
Yeah, that's really cool.
In the middle of developing the Quasar DLX, we both got a little bit frustrated on how long it was taking. So he took a break and he wrote the code for the Proteus, which is,
okay,
I want to say came out in 2011, 2012. I don't remember exactly. The original Quasar, because the one that's on our website is the 4th version of it. There was the original Quasar that was all analog. That was mid 2000s. Then we had the 3-knob one with a microcontroller and 6 waveforms.
Nice.
And that same microcontroller is what's used in the flanger. And it is, we sold a lot of those, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago. I actually keep wanting to make a more complicated flanger that's more like the bigger pedals, like the Prometheus and the Tremcoder. But it never quite seems to never quite seems to get done. I really don't know if I want to design an analog or digital flanger. There are lots of things where digital doesn't make a lot of sense. Like a DSP based, simple overdrive doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of noise problems that you can run into, and programming it is complicated. Making something that's digitally controlled is a little bit easier. And you have less problems with noise and dealing with all of the artifacting of gain.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
High gain in digital there's a lot of math that goes into making sure those edges end up in the right place where the clipping happens. There are some effects, I think, where digital makes a lot of sense, but like reverbs, making an analog reverb is kind of dumb.
Yeah.
Echoes, you can do a lot of stuff with DSP in echo pedals.
Oh, yeah.
But like an overdrive or a tremolo, it would be really... There's probably some company that makes it, but I really doubt there is a company that makes a DSP-based tremolo that is just a tremolo. I mean, obviously, in a multi-effects kind of thing, it makes sense.
Right.
For just a dedicated, simple pedal, it's so much easier to do it in analog without any of the risks that come along with digital.
It feels like the MIDI editor for the Tremcoder is something that's newer, kind of recently came out, at least I think so. And was that something is that something that you like? How did you go about making that? Because for me, as someone who likes to, I guess I like the user interface of it quite a bit. And it, there's definitely an intimidation factor, perhaps, to going in and using like the user mode and like doing it yourself. So when you have that in front of you, you're just like, oh, I just tinkered these knobs. So was that an easy addition, or did that take a while to develop?
So after the Tremcoder came out, my original plan was to write a MIDI editor under a framework called Juice. And that is it's basically C++. It's a C++ platform that is primarily used for writing VST plugins. But it also has lots of MIDI integration. Obviously, it needs to have MIDI in of some sort. And I started working with it. I designed a user interface for a Tremcoder controller. I'm not quite sure I actually finished the user interface. I wanted to, before I got too far on it, I wanted to see how hard it was to get MIDI up and running. And I decided to look for other options. What I actually used, there is a website called Controller, or CTRLR. And they publish a MIDI utility where you can basically create anything you want. There isn't a lot of coding involved, but you actually do have to understand how MIDI works. If you don't understand how MIDI works, it isn't super helpful. The funny thing is, I actually downloaded it years ago because, hang on, let me grab something.
Yeah.
Because I have this.
This
is an old OS rack unit, and I wanted to get I wanted to be able to program it via MIDI.
Yeah.
And there's, a lot of times for old stuff, you can find MIDI editors online that somebody wrote 15 years ago.
Yeah.
But I couldn't find anything for that. I think somebody did write one a long time ago, but you can't find it anywhere. It's like
Yeah.
nobody seems to have a copy of it. There's one other thing.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Oh man.
This.
Yeah.
Korg ES8. There's no standard MIDI editor for it.
What?
But there is, somebody made a file for controller that you can load up to that, and you can program that synth with it. So that is the reason that I have it. I'd had it on my computer for years, and I'd never even thought about the fact that you could create your own editors.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Like, oh wait,
that's what I use. It is still like designing your own is a little bit buggy, and it will occasionally just freeze up, and if you don't, you have to save your file constantly, or you will be very frustrated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it is cool. Are you planning on adding, like, is it possible for maybe Prometheus to have its own MIDI editor, or?
Well, it doesn't have MIDI.
Oh, it's right. No, you're right. You're totally right.
I said earlier, it's that it would have taken up more storage space.
Yeah.
We just didn't. Plus, we'd have to lose the tap tempo, the external tap tempo input, which is how it's set up now. So it would require big change. It would require some pretty big changes to add that.
Yeah, totally.
People have definitely asked. There have been lots of questions, especially after the Tremcoder came out.
Yeah.
Like, well, why doesn't the Prometheus have MIDI? And it's like, if I designed it in like 2019, it probably would, because the microcontroller market was just easier.
Yeah.
But I really don't want to rewrite it for a different platform, which is what I probably need to do to move it on to something else where I could get a microcontroller with more memory and resources and be able to keep up with it. The other thing that the Prometheus has is it's running 4 LFOs at once, which takes a lot of processing power.
But yeah,
right. What else are we talking about?
No, I think there's only 2 more things really. One is because I'm fascinated by the stepping mechanism on this Tremcoder, and I know there's 32 maximum spots, and it's kind of, I mean, this is the case in general. Like, the Tremcoder can be used to create like interesting rhythms, and I love the fact that I can put it at 120 BPM and create these like, kind of choppy tremolo things, and something like I don't know, it's one of those things where it's like, this is the ultimate tremolo. I want to be able to like make it seem like it's like quarter note, eighth note, quarter note, 16th note. Like, it kind of changes rhythms in a fun way, and you can create that illusion with the steps. So how'd you go about creating that stepping mechanism?
Well, it's, like I said, it's really based on a code base that we already have. And so there are a few different things that go on in the code of the oscillator. Getting really into the weeds on this stuff, but you asked. So each time the LFO cycles, there is a variable that tells it that a new cycle has started.
Got it. Yeah.
And so when it's using the sequence instead of a waveform, instead of reading all the data for the waveform between that time period, it just switches to a different number.
Mm-hmm.
The sequence is actually fairly simple. I think there were some really weird quirks when I first started working on it, where I was having some bugs. I'm like, this does not sound right, and it just seems like it's off time. This was at my prototyping desk, where I don't have much audio equipment other than a guitar and an amp. It's not and then I brought it into my, and at this time it was still a prototype on a circuit board, but I brought it into my studio. Like, I'm gonna hook this up and try to sync the tempo to a click track on my DAW and figure out what's going on. And it would go on the sequence, and it was most apparent, I think, on the shorter sequences, but I hadn't noticed it because originally all the sequences were 32. Early on you couldn't switch it. It would go for, I want to say it was 31 and a half beats.
Yeah.
I would skip half of the, and it took me a really long time to figure out why it was doing that. That part was frustrating, but I found it and fixed it, and it was fine.
Yeah. Yeah, because, it's cool. Like, the unit you sent me, it's got everything that I would, like, hypothetically, my brain would think of that a tremolo could do, it does, which is awesome, between the waveforms, between the, I'll call like dynamic waveforms, I'll call them, there's some volume things that happen, like, that's cool, the envelope things, like, it's everything all in one, and the fact that it all fits in this little enclosure, and you can edit anything you could possibly think of, it's really, really cool. And
it's funny. Go ahead.
The last question was for you, and we can hit at what you're going to say. Is there anything that you're working on that's on the horizon? Maybe, like, are you planning on taking that form factor and adding, doing maybe a flanger in that style or a different type of effect in that style, or are you kind of finding a new lane? You're like, okay, I've done this microcontroller for a few moments. Maybe I'm going to try something new.
Yeah, so there has been some beginning work on a flanger, and like I said earlier, I kind of alluded to it. Deciding whether or not to go digital or analog, that is the hardest thing, because honestly, I've thought about and started designing a new flanger several times over the last 7 or 8 years. And it's usually a bad sign when you get halfway into it and you lose interest and want to do something else. So anyway, I did start another one recently that I don't want to say too much about because I don't know how much of it will actually be featured, but the what I have so far is still in the smaller pedal platform, not the big one. But that is really limiting. But the funny thing is, the reason that it is in that is because it runs on the same circuit board with slight modifications as this pedal. So it would probably make sense for a bigger enclosure with more knobs and more ease to access all the different features that way, and have a dedicated tap tempo switch, which, that part would be kind of impossible to fit on the smaller pedals.
Yeah. I'm kind of wrapping things up in a way. That's cool. That's your design philosophy. It's like, if it doesn't excite me, then I'm not gonna do it. It has to be something different. It has to sound better than this thing. Expand upon your own ideas that you have internally, and so that's part of the charm of these Subdecay pedals. It's just like, it feels like a full thought. It's really exciting stuff. And so I really do appreciate the time that we had. We had a nice long conversation. I got the design philosophy, like the limitations to everything, and this is gonna be a really exciting episode. I think it's gonna be sweet. So, thank you for bearing with me and waiting, and we're finally doing this a year later. Here we are. But yeah, this was a really exciting talk. So thank you, Brian. I really do appreciate it.